Hello everybody and welcome to That's Football. How are Chelsea spending so much money and why will they keep spending it? We're going to dive into this because I think it's a question that comes up and I see a lot of people getting it wrong and jealousy sort of comes into it as well. The bottom line is Chelsea have spent £400 million in the last two transfer windows, January and the summer. How are they doing that? How can they keep doing that? How will that make them susceptible to financial fair play or anything else that apparently exists? And the honest answer is they won't if they get a little bit lucky and they have got a strategy. We'll get into it. But the first thing I'm going to say is they will keep spending. And what you've also got to remember is, I think people look at this with their red tinted glasses, maybe Liverpool fans, United fans, Arsenal fans. We all could do it. Man United could do what Chelsea are doing. It's not, when Man United come out and say we're not spending in January because we want to be careful about financial fair play, that's a nonsense. Financial fair play is toothless and it's changing. That's just United not wanting to spend and finding a way of doing it. The reality is, Chelsea, as we analyse what they're doing, and we can do that, the most important thing is they want to spend and they've got the £400 million to spend. Man United won't spend £400 million and Arsenal won't spend £400 million and Liverpool won't spend £400 million. So it's almost hypothetical and irrelevant to start saying how are they doing it, because you've got to have the money in the first place to do it. And then when you've got the money in the first place, you can then find loopholes or ways around, and we'll discuss that as well. So look, if you are scrambling around for a reason, how are Chelsea getting away with this? How are Chelsea getting away with it? Ultimately, that reasoning will come from the fact that your club isn't doing it. And your club isn't doing it because it doesn't want to do it. If Man United had £3 million in their pocket in January, they could spend it. They could find a way of doing it. They wouldn't fall foul of financial fair play. So you've got to have the money in the first place. And as we know, Todd Boehly bought Chelsea with that commitment to spend, was it over £1 billion on the infrastructure, on signings. So they've got the money and they will keep spending it. Now, the interesting thing with Chelsea is, and I'm not a Chelsea fan, but I'm pretty sure that their profit and loss is pretty much around break even. I think they have made profit. I think there was one year where they made 60 million profit, but then the following year, I did write it down actually, 2019 made a 96 million pound loss. The year before they made a 60 million profit. So it's all, around even. And I think their revenue for Chelsea is somewhere between 400 and 500 million pounds a year revenue. That's not profit. Their profit, as I said, isn't normally there. Sometimes they make a bit of a profit, sometimes they make a bit of a loss. So look at Chelsea, look at what they're spending, and the first thing you need to realise is Fofana, Badiashile, Mudryk, they're on 6, 7, 8-year deals. So the new rules for financial fair play that people need to know about is that eventually, and there is a staggered over 3 years, but eventually UEFA want it so that you cannot spend per year more than 70% of your revenue on wages and transfers effectively. So if Chelsea's revenue is £500 million a year, then they can spend, £350 million a year on wages and signings. So Chelsea's current wage bill is around £250 million. So let's top it up. Let's say Chelsea spend £250 million a year on wages, and their revenue is 500 million. Well, under the new UEFA rules, they would only be able to spend £350 million on wages and transfers. So if their wages are 250 and the 70% limit of 500 million is 350, that leaves them with £100 million to spend on transfers per year under the new financial rules, which aren't actually going to come in for about 3 years because they're going to stagger it down 90% 1 year, 80%, and then hit 70% in 3 years' time. So people would go, well, how are they spending £400 million in a year on transfers when effectively they're going to have to get that down to about £100 million a year? But it's called player amortization. I can't get this word right. Amortization. So basically, if Mudryk costs £100 million, but he's on an 8-year contract, it's 100 divided by 8. So what's that? About 10 to 15 million pounds a year. So out of that 100, you bought Mudryk and it's only cost you 15 million on your year. Effectively, think of it like this. If Chelsea spend £400 million on players, which they have, and everybody they buy is on a 4-year deal, 400 million divided by 4 is 100 million. So they could spend that £400 million that they've spent in the summer and now and buy all those players on a 4-year deal, and that's your 100 million. quick maths. Let me go back to this, right? Their revenue is 500 million. 70% of your revenue can be spent on wages and transfers. 70% of 500 million is 350 million. So Chelsea's wage bill is 250 million. 250 plus 100 gets you to the 350 million limit, which isn't going to be there for 3 years. You've got 100 million to spend on transfers. Well, Chelsea have just done that. 400 million pounds worth of players on 4-year contracts. They wouldn't be able to buy anyone else because they'd be doing 100 million for every year, but that's how they've done that. But of course, revenue can go up. Sales can have an impact. And let's not forget, instead of 100 million divided by 4, instead of 400 million divided by 4, it's actually 400 million divided by 5, 6, 7, because Mudryk, he's actually only costing you about 10 million a year because it's a 7-year contract. So that's how Chelsea are doing it. They're doing it by putting players on massive contracts, and that's why they didn't buy Enzo Fernandez, because Enzo Fernandez, Benfica wanted the money up front. They wanted 100 million up front. And Chelsea were like, no, we want to pay you over 8 years or 7 years or 6 years. So that's how they do it. And also, it's a good tactic when you are fighting Arsenal for Mudryk, that Arsenal would probably say, we'll give you 60 million or 65 or 70 million and we'll give it you now. Whereas Chelsea will say, well, we'll give you 85, 90 million and we'll pay you over 8 years. You're getting more money. You're getting more money over a longer period. So actually, that can make them more attractive as well. So Chelsea are actually being very, very clever. And let's not forget, it's all underpinned by the fact they've got the money. All they've got to do is make the system work. And this is where Arsenal United fans, I think, are getting a bit frustrated, and maybe other clubs, Liverpool as well. Because how are Chelsea doing this? How are Chelsea doing this? Chelsea are doing this because they've got the money. They've got the hundreds of millions of pounds. They've got that advantage. All they've then got to do is make that money work within the systems that UEFA and the Premier League have. And that's all they're doing. And they can keep making it work. They could buy Kylian Mbappe in the summer for 500 million quid and pay it over 10 years, 50 million. You know, they can do that. But of course, remember what Chelsea also do. Chelsea are very good at selling players. And when you sell a player, that also impacts on your revenues and profits. Man United aren't very good at selling. Liverpool are quite good. Arsenal, I'm not so sure. But Chelsea are brilliant at selling. So if Chelsea are selling players, that's taking them off the wage bill, reducing the wage bill, but it's also reducing your spend against your revenue. So that's another thing that Chelsea can do. And they've always been very good at that. So what I'm saying here is I don't see Chelsea stopping spending. And I think when you think about it, the long contracts, their ability to sell high, the ability to increase revenue, their ability to, spread the cost, it is doable. But it's only doable if you've got the money. And I think that's where people are getting confused, because they're going, how are Chelsea doing this? How are Chelsea doing this? They're doing this because they've got the money. They have the money to spend, and therefore, that's why. Chelsea would probably spend $1 billion if they could. But all they've got to do is, it's like accounting, isn't it? We've got the money. How do we make it work within the rules? Arsenal and United at the moment, well, we've got to be careful of financial fair play. No, you haven't got the money, have you? Because if you had the money, you could do what Chelsea's doing, and that's how it works. But there is a big risk. There is a big risk because ultimately, you do start topping up. Your wage bill will go up. You're still going to be spending each year. Mudryk 10 million, maybe Fofana 10 million, Badiashile maybe 10 million. You're still adding up what you're able to spend each year, and there will become a point where it could become a problem. In the case of someone like Mudryk, you sign him on a 7-year deal. You're paying that off, and it's coming out of your transfer funds every year because you're spreading it across. And his wage is going onto your wage bill every year. Now, if he is a success, that's fine because he's scoring goals. You're a successful team. You're making more money. You might sell him for more money. Everything works fine. If he flops, that becomes a problem. It's taking up a player in your squad, of which you can only have so many. And also, who's going to buy that player off you? You've spent way over what he's worth. And also, who's going to pay that wage? So you could end up get lumbered with a player for years and years and years that nobody will pay that wage for. You can't just let them go cheap, because if you buy a player for £80 million over 7 years and then you sell him for 20 million, that still gets registered and that'll go down as a loss under the new rules. So if you sold Mudryk for 20 million in 2 years' time, on the books it will be, well, that's an 80 million pound player. That's a loss of 60 million. That's going on your books. So there's a way around it. People can call it a loophole, but ultimately it could bite you in the arse if you buy the wrong players. And that's something that Chelsea need to be worrying about. Not worrying about, just wary of. You can keep doing what you're doing, but there will become a roadblock in the road at some point if these players fail. Because what you won't be able to do is just rotate them out and go, well, that didn't work, let's get rid of them. Because their wages, their contracts are so big and so long, you can't sell them for profit and make it work financially. And that could be a problem in the future. So what Chelsea are doing is very, very clever, and it's all underpinned by having the money in the first place. But it can all go wrong if the players you buy aren't the right players. Now, that's where scouting comes into it, and that's the only thing I'd be worried about as a Chelsea fan. So hopefully that makes sense. Get your comments in below. What I would say is I think they'll keep doing it, because if I spend £1 billion and I'm spreading that out over 7 years, 7 years, £1 billion, divide it, what's that? Oh God, I can't even think. 7 years, God, 150 million a year. 150. I could spend £1 billion on players, put them all on a 7-year contract, and my spend on transfers is 150 million a year if I spread it out. But you've got to have the billion, and I think that's the most important thing I've said. If I'm Man United, I could spend £1 billion on players, put them all on a 7-year deal, and over 7 years, all I've got to do is pay £150 million each year, which is a lot of money, and you've got to still have the revenue there. But if you can make it balance, you can do it. But you've got to have the billion in the first place, and it's all underpinned with having the money. And there's more to it than that. I mean, look, I'm doing this at a very high level, a very low level. We're just trying to make it simple, and there'll be people going, no, you're not quite right with this, or you can do this, you can't do that. But the point of the video is Chelsea can keep doing it, and probably will keep doing it. There will become a point where you fill the barrel up, and you better hope that barrel's full of quality. Because if it's not, you're stuck with that barrel, and you're paying for it for however many years. But that's how they're doing it, and that's how they'll keep doing it. Make sure you smash the like on the video and subscribe. I'll speak to you on the next one.